We want to finish the Hasidic phrase and terms of this mimer. So we'll have better vocabulary, Hasidic vocabulary. I'm going to be quiet. I'm just going to read, and someone here is going to tell me what is the meaning of these words. So we already did up until Hey. Now we're going to do Ois Hey, terms and phrases of Ois Hey.
What page are we on, Rabbi?
In the booklet, did you get this? Yeah, but so in this page, it's 17. 17. Thank you. You know what? We didn't do the questions on the last ois, on ois vav. So let's go to page 24 first. Sorry. So page 24. What is the difference? After the mimer explained everything, now what is the difference between Mishkan Yisecha Yisrael and Ahalei Yaakov? Someone has to tell me. It's got to be.
The Ole are tents, which are they're permanent ones, and then
Well, when you go camping and you make a tent, is that permanent?
No.
So there you are.
That's like the businessmen
Right.
that aren't studying all day. But then Mishkan, that's like the study types.
And why are they called Yaakov?
Because the heel.
Right.
Heel, yeah, the bottom.
So that's dealing with lower things.
Right, and Yisrael is Rosh.
Rosh, and that's dealing with higher things. Number 2, how are Balei Asakim? Balei Asakim means men involved in business. Now, the men involved in business only mean that you have your own business. It means anyone involved in Parnasa, so to speak. How are they higher than Yeshvei Ehel, those that are sitting and learning Torah all day?
Because they support them.
That's one thing, that's true. Rashi says that in Chumash. But what does it say in the Maimer?
They draw down like the principal yid, the yud into like the lowest world. Like people that are in study halls can't do that.
Right, because the whole point of creation is to bring Hashem down to the lowest place. Those who are, here's the sheet, yeah. Those who are Balei Asakim, they bring godliness to the lowest place. So that's Yeshua, that's Balei Asakim. There's another thing, yeah, sorry. There's another thing which is actually found in Hayom Yom. I think it was not too long ago that we had it. Where the Mittel Rebbe said that is another advantage in people that are doing business over people that are learning Torah all day. People that are doing business and in the Parnasa world have the opportunity to see godliness explicitly. And those who learn Torah don't. How's that? I would think the opposite. So he says, because when you see something like Hashgacha Pratis, that is observing godliness explicitly. In other words, for example, you have a store, you have a business, a customer comes in, you lose a customer. Let's say you lose a customer, and then you find out that this guy scams people. And you say, Baruch Hashem that I lost this customer. Who knows what would have happened to me? Or the opposite, something went wrong, you came late to work, something broke, and one thing led to another, and because of that you came to deal with someone who happened to be a person who's going to add so much to your business, which means you see things happening. All you need to have is the perspective. If you don't have the perspective that Hashem is behind it, then all you see is different, what we call in English coincidence. It was a coincidence. But if you see Hashem behind it and you see Hashem orchestrating everything, then basically you're seeing Hashgacha Pratis with your eyes. You're learning. So about Torah and about mitzvahs. But when you see things happening, it's almost as if you can actually see Hashem doing with his hands. It's really not the place for it, but I might as well put it in because anyway, it's a fundamental thing to know. Where there's a chapter in Tanya that explains something very powerful, and that helps understand what I just said. And that is, generally you find the term of Chassidus, that you can see things with the eyes of flesh, and you can also see things with the eyes of the mind. Like when you make a bracha in the morning, thank you Hashem for giving me eyes. In essence, we're thanking him for both eyes. The eyes of flesh, that I can see physical things around me. Baruch Hashem, I have vision. And there's also the eyes of the mind to see what's right, what's wrong, what's valuable, what's not valuable. Because there are people who physically can see, but in other ways they're blind. Like we see happening in the world today. People who might even mean well, and yet they can go out and support the worst kind of barbarians and the worst kind of things. And they think they're pashut blind. They're blind and they're deaf and they don't hear, they don't see. And they're totally, I'm not talking about people who are actually anti-Semites and they know exactly what they're saying. But there are people that are blind. And the same thing with life in general. They pursue things in life because they think that this is going to bring them happiness, and they're blind. They don't realize this is the opposite. People who are, let's say, into drugs, into other things that are destructive, that they don't see where it's leading to. So this is called, there's the eyes of the mind and the eyes of flesh. So Alter Rebbe says something very powerful, that when these two things work together, it's equivalent to actually physical vision. What am I talking about? There's a story in Gemara that Rabbi Majeski, who was the greatest tzaddik in his generation, this Rabbi Majeski lived to 120, like Moshe Rabbeinu. Before he passed, the students were sitting around his bed, and they asked him for a bracha. Like, this is his last moments, give us a bracha. So he gave him a bracha. And his bracha was, Hashem should bless you. You should have fear of God like you have fear of people. And they said, what? That's the bracha? Like, it's fear of God should be way, way more than fear of people. So he said to them, no, it's a very big bracha. And the proof is, when a person does something, they say, I hope nobody's watching me. But wait a second, Hashem is watching. In other words, his point was that, yes, of course you believe Hashem is watching you, but the belief that Hashem is watching to most people is not the same reality like I see two pair of eyes looking at me. When I see a human being watching me, so if you ask the average frum person, every frum person, a person that is 100% frum, believes, has no issues whatsoever, not one iota of an issue, and you say, do you believe that Hashem is watching everything you do? And the answer will be, of course. Are there things that you wouldn't do if people would be watching you? There's going to be a pause. And of course, the person would say, probably not. There are probably things that I wouldn't do. And the question is, but if you believe Hashem is watching, how could it be? If Chaim Yankel is looking at you, you're not going to do it. If Hashem is looking at you, you are going to do it. Take ourselves, for example. If I'd be somewhere and the Rebbe is looking at me, I'd definitely be very careful what I'm saying, what I'm doing. But if Hashem is looking at me, why shouldn't I be the same way? So the answer is because we don't see Hashem with our physical eyes, therefore it's not the same level of reality, and so therefore it doesn't have the same impact on us. Okay, that's understood. So when I give you a bracha, that your fear of Hashem should be equal to fear of human beings, it's a huge bracha. In other words, to say that it'll be so real to you like another person looking at. So the Alter Rebbe asked this question in Tanya, chapter 42, but how could that be, Taka? Hashem you don't see, and people, how's it possible that you should have that? And this is the Alter Rebbe's answer, because he says like this, with the eyes of our mind, we know that Hashem is looking at me, and Hashem is here, and Hashem is everywhere. And then when you learn that Hashem does everything, that means I look around and I see the stars, the sun, the moon, the constellations, a wind is blowing. If I put together what I know in my head and what I see with my eyes, then in a sense I'm seeing Hashem in a visual way. You understand my point? I'll try to give an example. If you ever would have the opportunity to teach the first grade, little children, this is the first time in their life, and this is the first class they ever had a class learning arithmetic. And you start off the class saying, so I want to teach you something new today. 2 + 2 = 4. Do you think they'll understand you? No. So what do? You take 2 oranges and 2 oranges, and you put 1 hand, 2 here, and you say, so how much is it all together? And they say 4. Oh, 2 + 2 = 4. Got it. The question is, if their brain is not developed enough to understand even such a concept, so what does it help me that they see oranges, but the concept is too abstract for them? If it's not too abstract, why do I need oranges? Understand my oranges question? What would you say is the answer? We always talk about this from another angle. It's related that, by the way, if he has the kids the next day, how much is 2 chairs and 2 chairs? They're going to say, you never taught us anything about chairs. And it's true. So the next day, you teach them that 2 chairs and 2 chairs is also 4. Got it? Then the third day, how much? 2 hats and 2 hats. You never said a word about hats. After a few days, they're going to get it. It's not about hats, it's not about oranges, not about apples. It's a principle, a concept. 2 + 2 = 4. But it's only after you show them, you demonstrate hats and apples and oranges and tables and chairs. So my question is, the advantage of demonstrating, because they could see it, but they don't see the concept, they see the apples. And the concept is too abstract, so how does it happen? So the answer is, if I'm going to transmit the concept through the apples and through something they can see physically, the concept becomes visual to a certain extent. That's the point. So if I think about Hashem and now I look outside, I see the wind blowing. I see the grass moving back and forth in the wind. I look at the sun and I see it moving, and I know Hashem is making this happen. I look at it. If I look at it with that perspective and I look at what's happening, it's like I'm a visual experience of Hashem. And I'll tell you, if you keep doing this over and over and over, it'll become like clear to you as if you're seeing Hashem moving things around in the world. So the same with Hashgacha Pratis. If I put all this together, and then when I see it go out to work, that happens, I miss the train, I catch a train, I lose a customer, I get a customer, I miss a phone call, I get the phone call, all these things, and you see the result. If I go with this, it's like I'm seeing Hashem visually orchestrating things in my life. But you have to sort of condition yourself to see things that way. In fact, the Alter Rebbe says that the word emunah, which means faith, has another meaning. Because in Hebrew, emunah comes from the word uman, which means a person who has a certain skill, which means you sort of condition yourself, just like a person who has a skill. He conditions his hand how to swing a hammer. He conditions his hand how to do other work. An artist or a painter, they condition themselves. So hey, I'm conditioning myself to see things from a certain perspective. And after a while, I see it naturally.
Well, I'm just here, you're saying like we should be looking around at the wind blowing and say, like, just be telling ourselves like that's Hashem moving the trees moving the winds, like
right.
Telling ourselves that over and over, or to see something in particular.
Right. I have to be mizbein that everything comes from Hashem. I mean, the Alter Rebbe talks about something in particular. It says in Gemara that the sun goes from east to west. Really, naturally, the pattern should have been from west to east, all the things that are turning up there. But the Gemara, it says in Gemara, but what's happening is the Shekhinah is in the west, and this is the sun bowing to Hashem. So then if you look and you watch it move in that direction, you say, wow, I'm watching the sun bowing to Hashem. You can look it up, the Tanya Perek Membeis. So that's why, that's another advantage, which is not in this Maimer, but another advantage in people who are in the business world, because in the Torah world, not much is happening. Rava says this, and Abaye says that, and Hillel says one thing, and Shammai says another thing. But in the business world, things are happening. People are coming up, people are going, and there's interaction. This one's upset, and this one's jealous, this one's that. Things happening all the time, and you have the opportunity to have a visual experience of Hashem orchestrating things in the world. Okay, let's get back to number 3. Why, in the time of Golus, is the Avodah of both equal? And not Golus in general, but specifically the end of Golus. What makes both equal? Because now the Ikar Avodah is Mesiras Nefesh and standing up to the tests. And here, whether you're a Torah learner or whether you're a person who's in the world, everybody has to be mobilized to the Avodah of Mesiras Nefesh. What is the main point of Eis Vav? The main point is what we just said about the 2 different kind of Avodas. And then what's the main point of the whole Maimer? Very important, if you write this down, and to remember the main point of the whole Maimer is to understand the purpose of a Nisayan. That a Nisayan is something which is coming from Hashem, but I'd like you to turn to page 46 of the booklet, 46 in this booklet. I'm doing this now before we go to another section. This will be, we're not going to be doing for the rest of the year, just one more piece about Nisayan. This is just a summary of the Maimer. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Number 1 is the questions on the Pasuk Matayu, and he brings 3 explanations to the word Neislis Neisis. Number 2, the main point is that the Nitzitz Elokei invested in Nisayan has a much higher source than anything else, as it is found in the lowest place, the mashal of the wall that falls. That's chapter 2, paragraph 2. The 3rd paragraph, the order of nature, Teva, is the biggest concealment of godliness. It totally hides the truth and presents sheker as if this is the reality. Number 4, the difference between elevating the nitzitz in a Nisayan and elevating the nitzitz in other physical articles is 3 points. Number 1, everything else is elevated by engaging it in a good way. And Nisayan is elevated by disengaging and working with oneself. I'm not working with the Nisayan outside of me, I'm working with myself to get the right perspective, to realize that it's not emes. Number 2, everything else has substance to it. The Nisayan has no substance. It is defined by blocking godliness, that hiding the truth. If I know the truth, then it has no substance. I don't know if you saw this, it was also going around these days where someone put together this book. And at the top of the book it says, the history of the Palestinian people from the beginning of ancient times till present. I'm thinking, wow, what could they write? The history of Palestinian people from ancient times till present. Anyway, you open the first page of the book, it says, if you believe a lie, then it's true. That's how it starts. Then you turn the second page, it's blank. The third page is blank. Anyway, the whole thing is blank. But the first page says, if you believe a lie, it's true. So basically, a Nisayan is a lie. A Nisayan is a deception. Something which is deceiving me, making me think that there's something blocking. And if I don't recognize it as that, then it's not. The third point is that the way to overcome a Nisayan is by arousing Yechidah. I think we should add, and the way to overcome other things is through intellect and emotion, not Yechidah. By thinking, by meditating, and developing the right kind of feeling, I can overcome anger, I can overcome arrogance, I can overcome jealousy, I can overcome laziness, I can develop love for Hashem. It's not through Yechidah, it's through thinking, and the thoughts stimulate feeling. But over here, you got to go deeper, you got to go to the essence. Number 5, The avodah of Yidden now at the end of Golus is mainly overcoming an Nisayon. And this is accomplished by, this is a new point. Number one, not engaging but dismissing. Number two, no dialogue in the mind, just using force to do what's right. And again, must arouse the force of Yechidah. So generally speaking, he concludes that two types of Avodah, Yaakov and Yisrael. Those are occupied with Torah, those are occupied with Parnasa. Yisrael is the head, Yaakov are the feet. Yaakov's Avodah is a tent, Yisrael is a house. In the times of Nisayon, which is now, the Avodah is the same. Now, by overcoming a Nisayon, the light of Havaya shines openly. It is above and beyond nature. Now, these last words. So again, if you look at this, you go it over a few times, hopefully you'll have the picture of the Maimer in your head. You don't have to remember every word, but if you have this outline in your head, you'll remember the Maimer. The Chassidus once said the Rabbi Majeski told him to learn a Maimer 60 times. And he said wherever he walked, wherever he stood, the Maimer was in front of his eyes 60 times. Okay, so the last words about Shem Havaya and Shem Elokim is what I want to go into now to explain a little bit more. And it's here in the booklet, but since I made this booklet, we were blessed that someone translated that Maimer into English. It happens to be a very, very fundamental Maimer, written, it was said by the Rebbe Rashab. The name of the Maimer is an interesting name. It's called V'yadaita Moscow. Why Moscow? Because he said the Maimer in Moscow. In those days, Moscow was not a place where Yidden hung around too much. The Rebbe Rashab was very sick. He went to see big doctors in Moscow. And in fact, the doctors told him that they don't see any hope. This is going to be the end. And then the Rebbe Rashab was considering to go to Israel because of that, and he wanted the Friedrich Rebbe to take over the leadership. But at the end, Baruch Hashem, he lived for another 20-something years. So the Maimer is considered one of the most fundamental Maimarim in Chassidus that we have, and I'll soon explain what the Maimer is about. But if someone can do me this big favor to take this Maimer and distribute it, thank you.
Can you keep this packet?
Yes. Yes, you can keep it. One of the speakers we sometimes have here in school is a Rabbi Vigler. I think he's the one who translated this. It's more than translating. He translates, he explains. It's a very, very good piece of work done. But the big thing is just
Rabbi Majeski is printed as a sefer, or it's printed as sefer, or he posted it somewhere.
That's a sefer.
Kahas.
Yes. Okay, so let me give you an introduction. To explain better and understand two things. Number one, what does it mean that the concealment is not a real concealment? And number two is that if I stand up to it and don't let it fool me, then ultimately the higher level of godliness that's hidden in the Nisayon will be revealed. In this Maimer, what he focuses on, the first pasuk in the Maimer, every Maimer usually begins with a pasuk. The pasuk, the Maimer, starts with the words V'yadaita. So this is something we have in davening, in Aleinu, in a few other places. V'yadaita hayom, you should know today, Ki Hashem hu Elokim, that God is God, V'shamayim mimal, and the heavens above, V'ala'aretz mitachas, and on the earth below. The second volume of Tanya, known as Shar Yichud V'Amuna, also begins with these words. And generally speaking, this is what those Maimarim, there's Maimarim, hundreds of Maimarim with this beginning, because in a certain way, this pasuk holds in it the essence of all of Chassidus. And what is it? There are two names of Hashem. One is Havaya, and the other is Elokim. And you should know today that Havaya and Elokim are really one. On the surface, it's very difficult to understand because Havaya and Elokim are opposites. And we just learned that right now, that Havaya is above nature. Havaya is where Hashem is revealed. When you see a miracle, godliness is revealed. One of the reasons why many people are now turning to Yiddishkeit, to Torah, to mitzvahs, to tefillin, to tzitzis, many people, there's different things happening, but many of them, Pashat, saw miracles in their personal lives, that their lives were saved, the lives of their children were saved. And when people see a miracle, it's a way where they see godliness more revealed. And that's what brings out that desire to become more connected. Elokim is the opposite. And the Kim, we just learned, is with Gematria HaTeva, nature. Nature is the biggest concealment on godliness. When you look at nature, you might forget there's such a thing as Hashem. Everything looks, it has a natural reason, a natural cause. You can explain it in a natural way. And people who don't believe in Hashem, when there is a miracle, they'll struggle and try to find a natural reason why that happened. You know why the sea split? Because at that moment when they were sitting there, there was a wind that blew at that moment, and that wind just happened to blow for them to go across and happened to end as soon as they went across, and everything else happened to happen. I once heard, this is not a joke, I really heard someone say this. It was a Pagisha, and one of the speakers was speaking, and he spoke about that the whole world recognizes that Matan Torah took place. And he said he read in a book a theory that what really happened was that Har Sinai is a volcano. And the Jews were standing by Har Sinai, and suddenly it exploded. And they all thought they heard, they all thought they heard exactly the same words. And that's how it took place. People will do somersaults and come up with those ridiculous, foolish theories as long as not, and explain things in a natural way, not that something above nature happens. So Tema is hides godliness. How could we say that Hashem and Elokim are one and the same when they're two opposites? One is there to reveal godliness, one is to conceal godliness. The Maimer is a very deep Maimer and explains things first in one way. It's a very sort of structured Maimer. Then after that explains it deeper. After it explains it deeper and deeper. And then at the end, after the deep philosophical part, he also explains how it's all relevant practically. But of course, I made a copy here in the middle of the Maimer, but I'm going to tell you what it says up until this point, and then we'll be able to appreciate what it says here. He says like this, he uses a mushal. How could it be that what reveals and what conceals is all the same? He gives a mushal, which we mentioned briefly, but the rest of the Maimer is based on this mushal. The mushal is of a Rav, a teacher of Torah, of course, any philosopher as well, but a teacher of Torah who understands a certain concept and understands it on a very deep level, which means he understands it on a very abstract level. Like we learned in different Maimarim, that someone like Rabbi Meir understood things so deep that he needed a mushal to explain the mushal, which would explain the mushal over 300 times. Because it was so abstract that even one mushal wasn't enough to explain the abstract concept. So he needed a mushal to explain the concept, and needed a mushal to explain the mushal, and a mushal to explain the mushal. Anyone remember we spoke about this? You probably remember from last year. How could something be so abstract that you need a mushal for the mushal, for the mushal, for the mushal 300 times? I'll give you a mushal. If you want to understand the difference between the sphere of Chochmah and Bina, what do we usually use as a mushal?
Just not understanding words like that.
No, in other words, if I want to explain Chochmah and Bina in the spheres, what do I do? What do I use from down here to explain as a mushal? We use the Chochmah Bina of the human experience, of our faculties, right? And we show just like Chochmah functions this way, and Bina functions that way. So too, Hashem's spheres is nothing to compare to our Chochmah and our Bina. It's infinitely more abstract than my Chochmah and my Bina. So my Chochmah and my Bina is a mushal to understand something which was infinitely more abstract. But if you would talk to someone who is very young, and you want to explain them how Chachma functions and Bina functions. They won't understand that either. So you'll need a mashal of fire and water, maybe something else. Oh, that they're going to get. Fire does this, water does that. In the same way, Chachma does this and Bina does that. But what you're really doing is you're giving a mashal for a mashal to understand that. And so on and so forth. The greater the person is, the more mashalim they need. So imagine a person is a Rav. He has a very deep, deep concept. He understands it on a very deep, abstract level. And he wants to teach this to his student. And the only way to explain it to the student is by describing it through a mashal. By using a mashal, what we're doing is we're watering down the concept. We're making it simple. We're making it physical, technical, much, much different than what it is in reality. So in a sense, what you're doing is you're hiding the real depth of the concept. Correct?
Mhm.
So he says like this, when the Rab hides the depth of the concept, and now the student doesn't really have the depth because he couldn't get it, but the teacher, is there anything concealing for the teacher, or is it only for the student?
Less. Not really.
Less or not really?
Like, I feel like it's still, if it's a constant for Shabbos, there's always gonna be some kind of concealment, but he obviously like understands it.
No, let's think of the mashal for a second. If you have something, let's say in Chassidus, and you meet a friend of yours that has no concept of Chassidus, and you want to explain to them, and you have to really water it down and simplify it. And as you're talking, you realize what I'm telling them is like really not what it's all about, but it's the best way they can understand it. So you're hiding the real understanding in order to explain it to them. So when you hide it, is it also hidden from you or only from them?
From them.
Right. In other words, when the Rav will give, even if he gives 3,000 mishalim, it's still only concealed it from the student, not from the teacher. He knows all the depth through all the layers that are there. Correct? So therefore, it's not a true concealment because the Rav really sees all the depth. It's only a concealment for the student, but not for the teacher. So therefore, Havai and Elokim are really one. For the student, it's two separate things. But for Hashem, it doesn't really conceal. And now he's going to go a step further. That's where we're reading now, page 142. Uba emes, in truth, gam legabe makabel ein ze helam amiti. This process cannot truly be considered as a concealment, even for the makabel, even for the recipient. Why? Because nevertheless, through this process of concealing the light, in this case, the light means the intellect, the logic, the deep logic. If not for that, this allows the student to understand the concept. If he wouldn't hide the concept, which means he would give it to him, he would transmit it to him the way he understands it, he wouldn't get it. He would just be, it would either be blank or it'd be confused. If the mashpia would reveal to him all the depth of the wisdom, the way he knows it, this would confuse him completely because he can't relate to it. It would just be something confusing in his mind. So by date symptom by Hester, so the fact that he hides it, the purpose is that it should be revealed to the student, and therefore it's not a true concealment. Because the way we define things is not by what it is, but what its purpose is. Yeah.
So if the teacher is concealing it from the student, it's not a real concealment. But through the mashalim, how then eventually does the student come to understand it at the level of the teacher? Like how does the student go from?
Okay, so a very good question, and that's going to be the next part of the Maimer. But this part is saying even if you wouldn't get there, but being that the purpose of the concealment is for him to get it, so the concealment would really be defined as a revealing sort of process, not a concealing process. You know how the Rebbe explains when people argue that a mechitza and a shul, or the mechitza between Yidden and non-Jews, is dividing people, it's separating people, creating separation amongst the community. We should be more welcoming and more open, and so on. And you're probably familiar with that. The Rebbe says the truth is a mechitza, according to Torah, if it's in the right place, whether it's a physical wall or a figurative mechitza, like between Jews and non-Jews, these mechitzas, their purpose is to unite, not to separate. And how could you understand it? The Rebbe gives a very simple mashal. The simple mashal is that when you put water into a pot to cook it, you put it on the fire. The pot is separating the fire from the water. And that's how fire and water could coexist together and actually create something together. You can cook now because fire and water are working together. Amazing. And if somebody would say if fire and water together could accomplish so many good things, let's put the water on the fire itself. Don't have the pot interfere, but put the water on the fire and you'll probably have even more benefit because now they're really united. If you put it on the fire, you'll either lose the fire or the water or both. That means even though technically there's something separating, its purpose is not to separate it, the opposite. Its purpose is to bring fire and water together. So all the differences in Torah between men and women, between Yidden and non-Jews, between Kohanim and Leviim, between Eretz Yisrael and other countries, Yerushalayim and other cities, all these differences, their purpose is not to make separation, their purpose is to bring together. So therefore, if the purpose of the concealment is in order to bring the concept to the student, by definition, it's not really concealing, its purpose is to reveal. It's just the opposite. So Havai and Elokim are one. So that means we have two explanations. One explanation that it's really one, because for Hashem, there's no concealment. The second explanation is even for the student, it's not a concealment, because actually this enables the student to understand the concept. If you would give it to him as it is, he wouldn't understand it. And then comes the third level, what you brought up, Nadja. The third level is not only is it for the student because at least he can get something, but the truth is ultimately the student will be able to understand the concept just like the teacher himself. And it's transmitted through this concealment. And that's why the concealment is not real. How is that? So that's going to be the next piece. Do we have time? No. Yes, we do. We have 2 minutes. Let's get started at least so we can turn the page and say we finished the whole page. And in truth, not only the superficial understanding could be transmitted through the concealment, because if you wouldn't conceal it, even the superficial understanding wouldn't reach the student. But not only that, but even the inner depth of the way the mashpia understands it, even that will ultimately be revealed to the recipient through transmitting and communicating this concept to him, even though he's hiding it. Because our sages say, let's turn the page. A person could never really understand fully the way his Rebbe understood things until 40 years go by. It'll take him 40 years. What do we understand from this? That that after 40 years, he could get there, which means after 40 years, he will be able to draw from what the teacher gave him all the depth that was there, which the teacher himself understood. So therefore, even the deeper part of the concept is not really being hidden. And if that's the case, it's not a true concealment. This concealment is only there to facilitate the opposite, revealing. But it looks like it's a concealment. One more piece. K'maimer Azal, like our sages say about Reb Meir, the famous Reb Meir, his tzedakah is called Reb Meir Balanes. He was the greatest, most brilliant sage in his generation. The Chachamim, all the wise people, all the sages in that generation could not understand the depth Like Rashi says, al etzem kabanose. The koyim adaita the rabbi etzem plimis kabanose. They could not get to understand the real grasp, his real true understanding. He was the one, by the way, that used to give 300 mishalim to explain one concept. Okay, to be continued.
Wait, what's the name of this timer again?
This mimer, v'yadaita, Moskva.
Anyone know what happened?
You? These sheets, you can keep it one.
Can I just end this and then start it again?
You're gonna start the Zoom again?
Yeah, but first.
Okay.
What's going on? What happened?